New analysis from Oxford University has found that more than 45,000 migrants have settled here in the East Midlands since 2011. That's a rise of 10% and one of the biggest increases in the country. Immigration, of course, is one of the hottest topics in politics at the moment. And now councils here in the East Midlands are working out how to cope with all those extra people and what it'll mean for our public services. Our political editor, John Hess, has been taking a look at the facts behind those figures.
At the University of Leicester, an exhibition of photographs charting the impact of immigration on Britain and the city itself.
But actually we've had a very positive reaction.
I'm shown around by curator Sarah Plum. Some are positive and celebratory, others menacing and hostile, reflecting society's often contradictory response to migrants.
What we wanted to do was really challenge people and ask them to question some of the negative stereotypes that are presented around immigrants or migrants.
And screened on the staircase, the 1968 Birmingham speech of Enoch Powell.
It is like watching a nation busily engaged in heaping up its own funeral pyre.
His anti-immigration rivers of blood warning still casts a long political shadow.
The government tightening visas for migrants, say from East Europe, has affected dramatically and I think detrimentally students coming from South Asia, where we are seeing a drying up of a flow of students that are really vital to the life of our universities.
On Leicester's Hinckley Road, the shops reflect the arrival of new migrants from Eastern Europe, some of the 45,000 migrants to settle in the East Midlands since 2011 alone.
One of my grandfathers started a knitwear factory and he employed 50 people.
And he was from Poland?
Yeah. And he started a knitwear factory in Leicester.
So it brought jobs?
Yeah.
We've got homeless from our own country living in the streets. So just to let more people in to come and take advantage of a benefit system to get free stuff all the time, it's not exactly right, is it?
It's balanced really, isn't it? Because, I mean, for many, many years we've really needed migrants in a lot of ways.
According to the latest figures, annual net migration now stands at just under 300,000, the biggest group coming from Poland. Yet the East Midlands constituency with the biggest number of EU migrants isn't in Leicester at all. In fact, the East Midland parliamentary constituencies with the biggest EU migrant population are Boston and Skegness with 9,500 and here in Nottingham East with just over 8,000 EU migrants. And it's the region's food processing industries and farms that have made the East Midlands, outside of London, their destination of choice.
Migrant labour is hugely important to farming in the East Midlands, predominantly in the fresh produce sector and potato sectors, but also indeed poultry and indeed dairy as well. So without it, we wouldn't be producing the food that we do.
But that influx worries East Midland Council leaders. They've commissioned their own research into the impact.
There was a benefit to migration, but we also know from our experience of working in our local towns there are issues that local communities have.
In its report to government, it presses for better data on the local migrant population, more English language lessons, funding to tackle what it calls the pressure of community cohesion and the eradication of modern slavery.
People in the region have got concerns about it and we need to make sure that we address those needs. So it's about working in partnership. We often meet the ministers from the Home Office and we also meet the shadow ministers. And what we're trying to say to our future government, that we want the East Midlands to make sure we've got the right resources and we've got the right support to be able to do the job.
And those concerns over migration may well affect the outcome of this general election.
Well, we're joined by Jonathan Bullock from UKIP, who was an East Midlands candidate for the party in the European elections and is now UKIP's candidate in Kettering. He also stood in Gedling in the 2001 election for the Conservatives. Welcome. So, Jonathan, in the East Midlands, we have the fastest growing economy in the country. Don't we need all these migrants? 45,000 of them have come here since 2011.
Oh, I think we need some immigration. And I think the history, both in the East Midlands and in the UK at large, is we've had
healthy migration right up to probably about 2001, when the figures became astronomical because we don't control our borders. And that's why UKIP this week have launched a campaign where we're suggesting that we'll have a restriction by a visa system, very similar to the Australian point system. We can actually control immigration.
Yeah, not a cap. You've gone away from that, haven't you?
Well, we're talking about 20 to 50,000. Last year it would have been about 27,000 who would have come in under them. This is highly skilled people. And also with our system there'll be no discrimination. So whether it's someone from India or Australia or Europe, they'd all be on a level playing field.
Let's talk about these 45,000 migrants who've settled here in the East Midlands. Is that a number that you feel is out of control?
Well, I think the figures nationally are 8 million people who have been born abroad, of which 500,000 in the East Midlands. And I think because it's uncontrolled, it's affecting housing, it's affecting services, education. I'm a councillor myself, and I've seen the effect that it's had, particularly with local authorities.
But we also heard, didn't we, from the NFU chap there saying that they wouldn't be able to do their jobs in parts of the East Midlands without foreign labour.
Well, the problem is that, that they've been taking jobs which traditionally would have been done by students, by other people, which could come back into being done. And also, if you actually look at the figures, there's been a lot of problems with underpaying employees, and I think we've got to hold up the minimum wage in these areas.
OK, well, Pauline, let me bring you in here. East Midlands Council say that there's no doubt that immigration is putting a strain on services like health, education and housing, particularly in our key cities, Nottingham, Leicester, Derby. What have you done to tackle that?
Well, I think what we've got to do is have a referendum on whether we're going to be in or out of Europe, and the only party that can deliver that are the Conservative Party.
But what have you done before a referendum
we have been
takes place?
Stopping those people who are coming into this country to live. They're not allowed access to free housing now. We're not going to allow them to send their child benefit abroad if their children aren't here, however long they've lived here, because that's been happening. We need the money in the economy here, not being sent abroad.
But the councils actually tell us that the official figures only go as far as 2011, so to them those figures are already out of date, so it's actually impossible to know accurately how many people are actually coming into the East Midlands.
Well, it is at the moment. We need to have proper border controls. We need to know who's coming in, but also who's going out, because there are people going out as well. I mean, some migrants come in for a period of time and then go home. So we need to know. But in terms of employment, in my constituency alone, in 2010, there were nearly 1,300 people unemployed. There's less than 400 now. So it's not as if the jobs are being taken by other people.
OK, well, what do you think, Matthew, about immigration here in the East Midlands? Is it an issue where you are, where you're standing in Loughborough?
Certainly when I knock on doors, people say it is an issue, and you have to acknowledge that, and Labour does acknowledge that it's a fair issue for the electorate to tackle us with. In terms of knowing who's coming in or out at the moment, we don't know, and that's why Labour wants to put an extra 1,000 more staff at the border controls.
You didn't do anything for 13 years, though.
No, we didn't. But you're the government of the last 5 years. It's now gone 3 times over your migration limit. And to that extent, we need now to look at new policies, which you failed on, to actually look at those controls.
But if you didn't do anything then, why would people believe you now that you're actually going to achieve this?
When you lose an election, you analyse what went wrong. You analyse the policies that were not adequate, and that's what we've done. And you have to allow a new party coming in and fighting an election to propose new solutions to existing problems.
Surely we need to control immigration. I think everyone's saying
But if the economy's growing, why is immigration a problem?
Because of the effects it's having on services, on education, on health, on housing, on the NHS particularly. This is all coming up. 75% of the British people are saying they want control on immigration, and the only way to do it is by a sensible policy, a bit like an Australian point system, which will work. But we can't do that because we're in the EU.
But
that's
if people pay for their health system, we could then afford to do it. My concern is we're not getting the students coming through who will bring money with them and help the universities, but also when they stay here for a period of time to work and then go home, they have an affection for this country.
But isn't that the restrictions that your government's put in.
Well, I have to say that I'm not 100% certain that I agree with the student.
Well, I'm not surprised.
I think the
I don't
student
agree
should
with it
be
either.
allowed here, but then they need to go home. But once they've spent time working in this country, they will bring investment back into
so
this
you'd let
country.
foreign students in then, Jonathan?
The students are not the problem here. Genuine
It is if
students,
they stay and they don't go home.
Genuine students are not the problem here. What the problem is very unskilled East European workers mainly, who are allowed in without any control
we need
at all.
Someone
That is the
skilled,
problem.
Because
the problem.
our people won't do the jobs. They won't do the jobs in Lincolnshire. They won't.
But part of the problem
Matthew
is,
have
I mean,
a word
first
now.
of all, in terms of universities, students, certainly in Loughborough, they do benefit the university and benefit the economy in the long term. But in terms of what people's issues are, first of all, they're against benefit tourism, and that's one thing that certainly we'll clamp down on in terms of paying for children overseas, people coming to this country and actually claiming unemployment benefit. Under Labour, you'd have to wait for 2 years. So one thing is to control benefit tourism.
It's 4
I think the
years
second,
if the Conservatives are returned.
but you haven't done it yet. You could have done it.
We are doing it. We are going to do
Well,
it.
you haven't. You've had 5 years to do it, and I think the other thing is the unskilled part of it. I think people are saying that we want skilled workers, certainly, but if you have skilled workers from overseas, then you ought to replace them with British apprentices, and that's part of the problem.
Well,
we're not training enough apprentices in this country for those skilled jobs.
As you saw,
2 million.
And finally, the other thing is that there are agencies who are targeting overseas people for their low skills, for the low wages. We have to end that system and say you actually ought to take from this country.
How are you going to control those from Eastern Europe? How are you going to control those from Eastern Europe?
You cannot at the moment. That's why the Conservatives need to bring in an in or out referendum, and they're the only part. I'll vote for the referendum. Yes, I was on the committee. I will wait and see what the conditions are at that time.
Conservatives will never vote for out. The Conservatives will never vote for out.
That is not true. There are many Conservatives who would.
Look at who your backers are. You'll never vote for out.
Well, we know it's going to be one of the hottest topics of the general election, so thank you very much indeed for joining us in the studio.